In the last few weeks, I've been contacted several times by growers that have some questions about the lime applications that their soil sampling has recommended going into this year. They've been looking at their field reveal result maps for their zone and grid fields, and they wonder if lime application is really a necessity for 2018 growing season. And what I found as I talked to those growers about those needs and what they saw in their maps was that it wasn't necessarily a question of if lime was going to pay or not. It was really, why do I have a soil pH? Why do I have a buffer pH result in my book? And how do those things actually come together to make a lime recommendation? So today I want to try to add some clarity to that whole process and explain the difference between soil pH, buffer pH, and how those things come together to make that lime recommendation. I'm Keith Byerly, Precision Ag Manager at Central Valley Ag, and this is your agronomy focus that corresponds with my article on the CVA blog site. In the blog this week, I get into the chemistry and a little bit of the math about how lime works, but for you, I want to simplify it a little bit more than that. So, when we look at a soil test, we've got the soil pH as that first result that we want to look at. Soil pH tells us the condition of our field, whether it's acidic or basic or in that Goldilocks zone of just right. For corn and soybeans, as you can see on the chart that's up right now, 6.3 to 7 is that Goldilocks zone of just right for row crops. If I start getting below 6, I really have an opportunity to take 10 to 15% of my potential yield away rather quickly, and when I get below 5.5, that really accelerates to how fast I can lose yield. When I go above 7, I have the same results. The reason that this affects yield so much is because of nutrient availability when we get outside of that Goldilocks zone. So when we talk about pH, what we're actually talking about is the percentage of hydrogen that's out in the soil. Those hydrogen ions come from nitrogen fertilizer sources, most specifically for us from anhydrous, urea, and UAN. And it's the buildup of that hydrogen that makes our pH go down and gives us the acidic soil conditions. So when I understand if my pH is higher or lower than what I want, the next place I go is to look at that buffer pH. The buffer pH tells me how much lime it's going to take to actually correct it. In reality, we should call buffer pH liming index. When I look at that buffer pH or liming index, it's telling me the amount of lime that I'm going to need to apply to my field to correct my soil pH. And it changes with our soils out there. If I think about 1 tablespoon of sand, that has about the surface area of the bottom of my boot. If I go to the other extreme and I talk about clay, which is a much finer soil particle, the surface area in 1 tablespoon of clay is about equal to the size of a football field. So when we talk about percentage of hydrogen, I can have 20% hydrogen on each one of those two soils, but the amount of surface area that 20% covers is vastly different between those two soils. So buffer pH helps add clarity to the process on how much lime it's actually going to take to get those pH ranges back up to that 6.3 range that we want to see. Both of those things come together then to make that lime recommendation that we see out on the field. pH tells us when to lime, buffer pH tells us how much to lime, and then we go to that calcium carbonate source, whether it's ag lime or Pell lime, or in some instances, a magnesium source in dolomatic lime to help correct the pH. A lot of growers have the misconception that we apply lime for the calcium portion and that's what corrects pH. In reality though, it's the carbonate portion on the back side. It's those extra oxygens in the carbonate that take care of the hydrogen ions that are out in our soil and help us correct pH. My take home for today is that this is not a simple solution and it's not easy to understand. But I do want to make sure that before you apply any product to your field, that you feel comfortable with what you're doing and why you're doing it. So ask your FSA for those answers that you need before you go apply product and make sure you're comfortable before you send a spreader out to the field.